Very grateful to Chaya and Jackie and to the Feigenbaum family for doing us the honor of being able to host this memorial Shiur Lili Nishmas Chaim Yisachar ben Yechiel Zedel Dov, and for the great opportunity to hear the words of Rav Moshe Weinberger. I'd like to ask Jackie to come forward and bring us up to date on some of the projects at Lili Nishmas Chaya.
On behalf of our family, I would like to thank all of you for coming to this Yurtzeit Shiur, L'Zecher Nishmas Chaim Yisachar. Many of you have asked, so I'll be very brief, and I'll tell you the progress that we're making on Project Yechi. To date, we have received our own tax ID number, and we have filed all the necessary paperwork to become a 501c3 with the IRS, and we're waiting for their approval. Initiated and started by Chaim, the sole purpose of Project Yechi is to assist cancer patients in paying their rent or mortgage while undergoing treatments, and they cannot work. Chaim, throughout the ordeal, felt very fortunate that at least he did not have to worry about Talia and the kids knowing that there was a roof over their heads. He was extremely sensitive to the fact that others were not as fortunate. To date, and thanks to the Project Yechi tablecloth gemach and the ladies running it, we have assisted 12 families in paying either their rent or their mortgage while undergoing treatments. Just yesterday, we received a call from a local family whose major breadwinner will be undergoing treatments, and they wanted to know if we could pay the mortgage for the next 6 months. Project Yechi will help that family, and unfortunately, many others. And there are so many others to help. Brochures about Project Yechi are available in the lobby, as well as Chaim's Emunah magnet. Feel free to help yourself. May the tzedakah that we give, the takanos that we do, and the learning that we learn all have an aliyah for the neshama of Chaim Yisachar ben Yechiel Zedel Dov. Thank you.
It's a great comment to recognize the many Rabbanim who are here with us this evening. Rav Przansky and Rav Turk, Rav Blas, Rav Moshe Tzvi Weinberg, Rav Mordechai Glick, Rav Goldstein. And your presence gives a great comment to this evening. This evening we remember Chaim Yisachar ben Yechiel Zedel Dov. Remember his life and the fullness of life that he had and that he was, and that we so very much miss. The simcha that he brought, the simcha sachayim, which is Petira's so much diminished, and the simcha with which he would diffuse a difficult situation and deflate a concern with charming humility. The last day or two has had us focused on a phrase that is associated with Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut, the phrase of Giborim Bal Korcham. people that heroism is forced upon them. When a family suffers this sort of a tragedy, they all become giborim bal karcham. But when the family continues to daven and continues to do good with passion, then they become giborim, heroes by choice. Chaim, over the course of a short life, matured to being a Jew with great depth and great love of Torah, great love of Chassidus. When he first became ill, he became a gibor bal korcho. Heroism was thrust upon him. But in very short order, he became a gibor, a hero, a new gevura by choice. And throughout his darkest moments, he spoke of faith, he spoke of bitachon, he spoke of emunah, he spoke of hope and of chizuk. And he taught us so many lessons. And no doubt he would have taught us many more. And we've been granted the opportunity. We welcome this evening Harav Moshe Weinberger. And it hasn't been easy for me to arrange the evening. Not because Weinberger wasn't available, he made himself available to us immediately. But in the course of making the detailed arrangements, I would come by Rav Weinberger's office many, many times in the course of an afternoon. And unceasingly, he's meeting with Talmidim. And the truth is, the importance of the matter would usually have allowed me to interrupt the meeting. But when I would look through the window, I would see the intensity of the meeting and the warmth. And there was a certain aura every time the Rav meets with the Talmud that I could not bring myself to disturb him. Rav Weinberger, the tzibur gathered here this evening. Its numbers indicate that, without any doubt, you do not need any words of introduction. But allow me to simply say that I have no doubt that Chaim is one of the many thousands of Talmidim that you have that you've never met. He loved your shiurim. He would download them at every possible moment, and he would share them with his family. And I have no doubt that you were instrumental in shaping Chaim's gevura, shaping Chaim's strength, shaping his emunah, and shaping the lessons that he has left with us. I have no doubt that his neshama cherishes our evening that we have with you. And I thank you very much for joining us.
B'shus, my friend, Yechoshev Harav, b'shus all the Rabbanim who are here, and friends, Achai v'reyai. And particularly the family of Chaim Yisachar. It turns out that our family has a long standing connection with the Schneiders. Mr. Schneider should be well. Arichas Yom V'Shan. And I remember Mr. Schneider. And I've gotten to know the mishpacha over this past period of time. You know, it's so strange because I miss Chaim terribly and I never met him. And he's come to mean something to me. Discussions that I've had with Talia and with Ramesh Tzvi, the family. I wish I would have known him. I know that there's a gaping hole in the heart of this community and the community, Muncie, wherever Chaim was. It says in Pasuk, in Shirim Doidi Shalach Yodai Min Achor, that my beloved reaches his hand, HaKadosh Baruch Hu reaches out Min Achor, from that terrible hole. And the family and friends and all of us have to take hold of Hashem's hand. And that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about Emunah. This is a story that I often tell, but in this context I must tell. Before the Rebbe Abunim from Pshischa, before he passed away, he told a very strange story. He spoke of a Polish Jew, a wealthy Polish Jew, who had a mishagas for horses. Okay, everybody has a mishagas. And he bought the most expensive horse in Poland. And you understand that when you have such a beautiful, expensive horse, you have to have a proper stable. You have to have a state-of-the-art lock to accommodate such a beautiful horse. But that's not enough. The Rebbe Abunim said that this Jew hired a shomer. He hired a guard who would stand guard during the night to make sure that the horse in the locked stable was safe. And as it often is with Gvirim, with very wealthy people who own a lot of things, it was difficult for him to fall asleep. He was still worried about the horse. Mit alles, with everything, he was worried about the horse. So sometime around 12, 1 o'clock, he put on his robe and he went outside to see how things are going over there by his beautiful stable with the beautiful horse. And he sees that even though it's very late, he sees that the shomer, the fellow, is up, the guard is up. And the gvir, the wealthy person, says, I'm very impressed, it's so late. How are you able to stay up so late at night? Aren't you sleepy? So he said, I'm taka sleepy, but there's a thought that I have in my mind, and it doesn't allow me to sleep. What is that? He says, you know that when carpenters, when they bang things into the wall, a nail into the wall, what happens to the wall? Where did that go? I'm thinking about this for a long time. I can't understand it. Where does that go when you make the hole in the wall? So the Gvir sees he's a little bit of an eccentric person. He's okay, you work on that. You keep on working on that. The Gvir goes back to sleep. A couple of hours later, it's like 3, 4 in the morning, he comes. And the guy's up. And the Gvir is very excited. And he says, tell me, how do you stay awake? He said, I'm thinking, I have this, I don't understand, when they make the bagels, what happens to that part inside the bagel? I don't know, I never saw what happened to it. So the Gvir says, it's a good question. You think about that. Comes back, can't sleep. It's like 5 o'clock, 5:30, he goes, the last mishma, the ashmeres. He goes out, and the guy's awake. And he asked him, tell me, what are you thinking about now that you're able to stay awake? He says, I'm thinking it's hard for me to understand. You're the richest Jew in Poland. You bought the most expensive horse. You built the most expensive stable. You put the best lock. I don't understand. What happened to the horse? What's the name of the fair? This bothers me. And the Rebbe Abunim said this a short time before he was nifter, and he began to sob. He was crying. He was crying. What happened to the fair? What happened to the horse? And there are many interpretations among the Chassidim. What was he talking about? I saw recently a Talmud Chacham who described the difference, one of the differences between how things are now and how things were not so long ago. Not so long ago, and there are many of the Chevre here who remember, not so long ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, not so long ago, there were many, many Jews who were Orthodox, but they weren't observant. You know what I mean. We had people in shul that not only was the house with Shabbos candles and was with a Kiddush, but these were Jews that said Tehillim, warm Tehillim. Jews from the home. But they would go to work on Shabbos. And I remember seeing people like this pulling up and coming and going, and depending upon what time of the year it was, whether they'd be Friday night by davening and so on. So they were Orthodox, believing Jews, but they weren't observant Jews. The time that we're living in now, we see just the opposite. That there are many, many, many observant Jews, Baruch Hashem. Many observant Jews. We're grateful. But many who are not Orthodox. There's something terrible. Something's missing. Communities have been built with magnificent schools, beautiful mikvahs, boys' schools, girls' schools, mixed schools. Shemesh Shabbos, Shemesh, everything, stores, shopping centers. Tremendous amount of gemachim, all the chesed and so on. What happened to that which we were all supposed to be guarding? What's the purpose of all of these buildings? What's the purpose of all of these institutions? What's the purpose of all of our learning, all of our davening? So I believe that a lot of this has to do with a simple lack of understanding of Bechlal, why is it and how is it that a Jew believes? And I want to talk about that. In other words, what's the makor? What's the source of faith? Where does it come from? Me'oz u'mikedem. Throughout all of the years, as you all know, there have been two Batei Midrashim. There have been two schools regarding this question of how does a Jew believe? Where does Jewish faith come from? There have been two Batei Midrash. The most famous representative of one of the schools of the first school is, of course, the Rambam. The shorish of Amunah, the root of one's faith, is the human mind, the rational mind, the rational, logical mind that dictates and provides proofs to back up which logic itself dictates, that there's a creator of the universe. There's a Borei Olam who's here. So that's the first Beis Medrash, the Beis Medrash of Seichel, of the mind, of logic, of rational intellect. And there's a second Beis Medrash. The second Beis Medrash speaks of faith as being primarily an act of Kabbalah's Ol Malchus Shamayim, surrendering oneself to something higher. This is oftentimes referred to as Emunah Pshuta, simple faith. It's a faith that doesn't depend on proofs. It's not nurtured by logic, although it's not irrational, but it doesn't depend upon logic. Now, in this world of Emunah Pshuta, in the second school of Emunah Pshuta, that which is called simple faith, there are two basic ways that Emunah Pshuta is understood. The first is that Emunah comes from the Masorah that we receive from our parents, our grandparents. It's something that is absorbed in the home, in the community, over the years. There are many, many tzaddikim who focus on this aspect of Emunah Pshuta as a Kabbalah, something that was received from generation to generation. The second mahalach in that world of Emunah Pshuta says the following. Sof kol sof, the human mind is limited. The seichel of a human being is mugbal, is limited. And therefore, it's necessary that in order to have faith, to experience faith, one must be prepared to be mevatel his seichel. Again, to surrender one's own understanding and to acknowledge that he doesn't understand everything. And there are things in the world that are l'ma'alim min ha'seichel, that transcend the intellect, that are higher than logic. Now, both of these interpretations, or both of these ways of Emunah Pshuta, have tremendous problems, tremendous deficiencies. As beautiful and as sweet as they are, a person who believes because his father and mother believed, again, it's very precious and it's very admired. But the fact that one's parents believed in God does not necessarily create any type of an intimate relationship on your part with the Creator. There are many things that our parents have done and we continue to do. And for many of these things, psychologists are doing very well. The fact that the parents had certain beliefs and the children continue on with those beliefs is very charming. But to be a Jew who's a mammon means to have a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Kozhen Tzemagid Schus Yigelenu said, and it's actually in the Torah about Pesach Sheni, in Avodas Yisrael. The Kozhen Tzemagid says that when a Jew says a brach and he says the words Baruch Atah Hashem, that you and I say many, many times a day, Baruch Atah Hashem. The Kozhen Tzemagid said that unless a Jew says those words, Kashi Yedaber Ish El Re'ehu, with the intimacy, with the familiarity, and with the love that you would say that you have when you would speak to your dearest and closest friend, to a child, to a parent. So the Kozhen Tzemagid says that one hasn't stepped upon the threshold of faith. So the fact that your parents believe and your father went to shul, so you go to shul, it's beautiful. But first of all, that's not going to create a kesher, an independent, deep relationship between you and Hashem Yisbarach. You just go through the motions because you respect your parents and your grandparents, Jewish heritage, tradition, all of that. And Beis, when it comes down to there being a great test in life, and when man is confronted by something that was totally unexpected, it's very, very hard for faith that is based upon tradition to sustain that person's religious integrity at that moment of the most horrible test of his life. because the Zayda and the Baba, because they did those things. At that moment of choice, if you're not in that world that the Kosher Tzemagi described as Baruch Ato Hashem, and Ato Hashem, if you don't have that, there's very, very little else that you could rely upon at the moment of the most difficult test of your life. So that form of Emunah Pshuta is a Bal Chisaron. It's lacking, it's missing. And then we have the second type of Ma'amin with Emunah Pshuta, whose entire Emunah is based upon his acknowledgement that one cannot rely upon human intellect, and therefore he has to surrender to something higher. But at some point you begin to wonder, in that case, how am I different than the Yishmaelim, who are also surrendering to something higher, and in the name of what they're surrendering to, they're murdering innocent people day in, day out. So again, it's very beautiful that the person has this attitude, that one does not rely upon his own seichel, but that can't be the shirish of Emunah, the root of faith, the root of Emunah. So what is Emunah? Where does it come from? So on the page that you have in front of you, the first Ma'amokim is from the Maharal in Gerus Hashem Perek Tes. All the Mekubalim, all the Bali Hasoid, the Talmidei Hagra, Talmidei Baal Shem, are drawing from the faith that's described here in one sentence from the Maharal. The Maharal speaks of Emunah. It's kedai if you have a chance to look at the entire parak. The Maharal speaks of Emunah as an or, as a light that comes from beyond oneself, a light that comes from God Himself. Umishu ma'amin ba yizbarach. And the one who believes in Hashem, a Jew who believes in Hashem, umishamamin ba yizbarach, zeshu mitzad Hashem yizbarach Hashem amin ba. Emunah does not come from you. Emunah does not come from us. It's mitzad Hashem yizbarach Hashem amin ba. The root and source of Emunah is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'll explain this. V'u nimshach elov legamrei. And it's this faith that is implanted within the Jew by the Creator of the world. It is this faith that draws the person, that pulls at the person. And he's nimshach elov legamri, he's completely drawn to the Creator. He's talking about something in the parak there about Amen, we're not going to get to. I'm not going to talk about that now. Ki ha'emunah hi mitzad Hashem yisborach, lo mitzad daito. The Maharal says that emunah is mitzad Hashem. Emunah, belief in God, comes from God. Lo mitzad daito. Not because of the person's thoughts or opinions. So let me explain. Rabbi Seinul Ba'alei Hasoid, the tzaddikim, the masters of the secrets of Torah, that world of the Maharal, were sent from Shemayim to reveal this side, that the Emunah Pshuta, listen carefully, the Emunah Pshuta of a Jew, where the Emunah Pshuta comes from, where that simple faith comes from, what the koach, what the strength and power of that Emunah is. It is not just something that is handed down from parents to children. And it's not something similar to closing one's eyes to all that makes sense and taking some great leap of faith. But rather, emunah is an or mimorim, it's a light from above. Emunah is a fact. Emunah is a metzias. Emunah is a reality that's woven into the fabric of each and every Jew who has ever lived. Look at the words of the Tanya. Mamori Admar Hazoken. Kihina Yisrael he maminim b'nei maminim b'Hashem echad. Jews are maminim, the children of maminim, in one God. Be'emunah pshuta, with simple faith. B'li shum tam v'das hamusog gemuvan, without any rational explanation. Alma v'lama v'eich. What do I believe in? Why do I believe in this? How do I believe in this? Umasha, it's supposed to say nilu. Umasha nilu chachmei hamechkar b'sifreim ha'filosofim. But the philosophers have grown weary trying to explain in their books. Kotzer matzah mesechleim, in their minds have not been able hasik efes katseyu echem mini elef alfi alofim, who is that which the greatest philosophers, with all of their philosophical speculation and all of their brilliance, have not been able to reach. Who yisoid poshut uklal munach kavur belev kol ish mi beis Yisrael, is a yisoid poshut, a simple, clear, foundational reality. Uklal munach kavur belev kol ish mi beis Yisrael, and it is implanted, fixed in the heart of every Jew. Mikerev velev amoik, from deep within him. Velev amok, in a deep heart, in the depths of his heart. Ki yosed shalotimot, like a stake that can't be moved, driven deep into his existence, to his very being. Bemuna kvur v'chazaka. Look, every word of the Tanya. Bemuna kvur v'chazaka va'afilu kol haruchas sheba'olam, and all of the powerful stormy winds of the world. Ein mezizais klum, cannot move this faith that is woven into the DNA of a Jew. Can't move this faith. Ein mezizais klum, me'ayin nimshach hakoyach hazel Yisrael. And where does this strength come from? Where did Chaim Yisach's strength come from that the Rav was describing? The family strength. And unfortunately, over history, my parents, the home that I grew up in, a home of survivors, who after the war lost everything, came here and started again. The Tanya says, that it's higher than anything that the human mind can comprehend. Chazal say in the Gemara, there are things that the person can't see with his eyes. We can't see with the human eye. But mazalayu chazi, but the mazel, the root, the shirish, that person's neshama, the soul of the person, sees very well. Perish. Even though he can't see this, not only with his eyes, but he can't see this with his mind's eye. He can't see this, he can't understand this. A friend of mine told me about tshuva, that he knew, this goes back many years ago, and this fellow had studied in West Point, and he was a soldier in the army. I don't know what rank, but he was already moving up in the ranks. And at that time, it was, I believe, the Persian Gulf War, if I'm not mistaken, I don't remember. And there was some sort of a meeting that the general had with the officers and with some Choshev soldiers of the American army who were based over there in the Middle East to keep things quiet And the general gave orders that even though we're to do our best not to shoot at all, American soldiers are to do everything they can not to fire a shot. We're peacekeepers, and we have to be very careful. And then he went on to say, however, if need be, then you will have to return fire. So this guy, there was a Jewish soldier, this fellow from West Point, he says, excuse me, General, I have to tell you, I would never fire against an Israeli soldier. I would never shoot an Israeli soldier. I'm a Jew. So the general said, let's make believe we didn't hear what Mr. So-and-so said. And you heard what I said. These are the orders. And he said, you'll excuse me, I cannot do such a thing. I will never fire. So my friend told me that there was a whole din udvarim with this guy. And in the end, he was able to get an honorable discharge from the army. He lived in some small town somewhere in the Midwest. His parents couldn't understand, like, what did you have to get up and tell him? So don't shoot. Why do you have to announce to the whole world you're not going to shoot? I mean, if you're really a Jew, then why would you be so dumb? So why do you have to get up and announce that? Just sit there, and if you don't want to shoot, so don't shoot. What do you have to? He says, I'll tell you the truth, I don't know. And what happened to this guy? He's home, and his whole life, basically, all that he was planning on being a professional army person, was ruined. A couple of days later, he was packing his suitcase, and his parents asked him, where are you going? He says, I'm going to Israel. They asked him, why are you going to Israel? He says, I don't know why I did that, and I'd like to find out. I want to find out what was there that was in me that compelled me to say that I couldn't possibly harm another Jew. I don't understand that. And he became a big Baal Tshuva, that's my friend told me. Eloi Chazi. He didn't himself understand, he couldn't see this. However, above, in the root of the soul of each and every Jew, that part of us that is not enclosed in the body, not even in the brain, in the heart, is not enclosed in the body. That is called Mazalayu, his mazel. Sees this clearly. That it is impossible to budge, it is impossible to run away, to leave, to deny, to reject the elokus that's within oneself. So what the Tanya is telling us, Rabbi Isai, is that emunah is a fixture, it's a fact. It's something that was planted, as the Moral tells us, it's not mitzad atzmo, it's mitzad Hashem Yisborach. That inside each and every one of us, there's a nefesh elokii, there's a chilek elokom yimal. Elokus mamish, godliness. God himself is in each and every one of us. Therefore, what the Maral and the Tanya and all the tzaddikim tell us is that emunah is not a concept. You can make 100 yimei iyun on the subject of emunah. And that is not necessarily going to help you either when it comes down to a nisayin, a difficult test. And you can major in emunah. And you could study the Rambam and the Maharal and the Ramchal. You could study all of the Svarim. And you know the Sfas Emes and you know Tanya, everything. And you come from a home with the parents and the grandparents who were Ma'aminim, B'nai Ma'aminim. Because the Svarim are telling us that faith, the emunah of a Jew, is not a shita. It's not a subject, a concept. Nor is it simply a Masorah that is handed down from generation to generation. But rather, emunah is an or, is a light that Hashem is meir, that Hashem shines into the soul of a Jew. Therefore, it's his identity. It's who he is. It's the metzias of his existence. It's not the blind faith of the Ishmaeli. It's not the faith that is irrational. It's the reality that is fixed in the essence and the core of a Jew that enables him to feel elokus, godliness, as the most natural instinct of who he is. Turn the page over, look at the words of the Tanya in Tanya. Perek Yud Ches. Hine ha-chochma hi makar ha-seichel v'havana. Chochma, of course, we identify with the intellect, with the mind. Vilamala mehabina, but Kabbalistically, chochma, as you know, is higher than bina, than understanding. She'avonis ha-seichel v'hasagoso. Bina means to understand something, to analyze something intellectually. But v'ha-chochma ilamala me'havana v'hasaga. In Kabbalah, chochma is that which transcends, it's higher than what we understand intellectually. V'yimakar lahen is that place from which bina comes. V'zeu lashon chochma, therefore the word chochma consists of two words. Koach ma, that strength, that ability of ma, which means of what? Shuma she'ena musag, to be able to comprehend, to be able to connect oneself to that which is incomprehensible. It hasn't yet become enclosed in the intellect. The infinite light of God is enclosed in that chachma that is inside you and me, and each and every one of us, the koach of chachma that a Jew has. The infinite light of God is enclosed in the chachma. The leis machshava tfisa beklal. And the human mind cannot comprehend that intellectually. Therefore we see that all Jews, even those who were traditionally not educated, didn't know. They believe in Hashem. Emunah is that which transcends what we understand intellectually. There's an inyan of being able to be like a pesi, almost like someone who's a fool, to understand. Regarding Hashem, who transcends all that the mind can comprehend. And the mind can't take hold, can't wrap itself around God. All of us like fools, are like fools. As Lo Yisbar says, I'm a fool, I'm empty, I'm like an animal. And I can't leave you. There's something inside of me that doesn't allow me to leave you. I can't let go of you. Therefore, we have seen through history, with very few exceptions, that even the simplest Jews, even those who are Poishei Yisrael, even sinners, Jews who are not religious. My father's old Gazun told me that in his hometown of Ungvar, in Hungary, in Czechoslovakia at that time, there was a Jew who would sit on the steps of the big shul in Ungvar every Shabbos smoking a cigarette. At a time when that was not something that people would do publicly for the most part. And he sat on the steps, he was making a statement. And my father told me that this Jew died in his arms in Mauthausen. And he died in his arms with a Shema Yisrael, that my father said, even though this person was like a toothpick, that you could hear the Shema Yisrael from a mile away. Poishe Yisrael, Kal Shebakalim, Poishe Yisrael, Moisrim Navshim Al Kedushas Hashem, who like that soldier from West Point, without knowing, without understanding why, is Moisrim Navshim, even one's life, Al Kedushas Hashem, to sanctify God's name, Al Haroiv. Why there are exceptions we'll talk about in a moment. V'soivlim inuyim koshim, and they're prepared to go through terrible, terrible torture. Shloi likfor b'Hashem echad, not to deny Hashem, even just to say with their lips, just to say the words. Even if they're empty, amei haaretz, and ignorant people, they don't know of God's greatness. And even a little bit that they know. They never think about. Ve'ein moishu nafshe machmas das v'izboinus b'Hashem klal. It's not like they've reached some rational conclusion. It's not like they went to some inspire or Esha Torah Shabbaton, or somebody showed them proofs on a smart board, some proofs about how the pasuk equals your name and address or something. They never saw that stuff. They don't think about it. And I got news for you. The people whose belief is based upon those calculations are also not ma'aminim because of that. Which, by the way, I don't hear people talking about those proofs anymore. It's not like these borim, these amaratzim, thought about, and we're looking up all kinds of theological proofs and historical proofs. When they were standing there b'shas ma'aseh, when that Jew from Ungvar was sitting in my father's arms and he cried, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and his neshama left him like Rabbi Akiva. It was bli shum das v'izboinenus. It wasn't because he reached some logical conclusion. It wasn't because he said, now I understand what they said at the Yom Miyun in Shul 2 Sundays ago, when some professor got up and lectured about Emunah. And he remembered, and he said, I happen to have my notes in my pocket. It becomes impossible, simply impossible, to turn away from God at that moment. Blishum tam v'tainu umana klal, without any explanation. V'hainu mishum sh'Hashem echad. The reason for this is because Hashem echad, the one and only God, Hashem echad, meir or mechaya kol hanefesh, is illuminating, is filling kol hanefesh, and it's enclosed in that quality, that faculty that's called chochma shebenefesh, the wisdom, the knowing of the Jewish soul. That's higher than anything that we understand with our minds. So now how do we explain, and again, the time is short, it's bekitzer. How do we then understand that it's possible for Jews to have sveikis in emunah? That all of us have had different times in life when we have certain questions, certain doubts, and we wonder whether or not we would be like that Jew in Mauthausen. You know, there was a Jew that came to the Kotzker. Everybody here heard from the Kotzker, right? You heard of the Kotzker. He's very sharp. So there was somebody that was having terrible issues with his faith. He was having sveikis in emunah. And he came to a Mendel from Kotzk. And the Kotzker didn't even look up from the Gemara. He wasn't known for his politeness. And he didn't look up from the Gemara. And this Yid starts to cry. He says, Rabbi, I'm having issues. I'm not sure anymore. I don't know. And the Kotzker is looking in the Gemara. And he says, while this guy's crying, every minute or so, the Kotzker says, no, yes or no. He says, I mean, Rabbi, what do you mean no? I'm saying, I have doubts. I have doubts with my emunah. And the Kotzker said, no. Okay, so what? So the man starts to scream. And he says, so what? So what? Did I have problems in emunah? It's my whole life. It's my very existence, who I am. What do you mean, so what? I have problems with emunah. So the Kotzker kept his eyes the whole time on the Gemara. He said, so it bothers you so much, it means that you have emunah. It bothers you, you know? It's your whole life. You're making a whole speech. You're banging on the table. You're yelling at the Rebbe. You're screaming. You're crying. It's something. Sveikis and emunah. And forgive me if this sounds simplistic. If there were time, we would talk for a few hours now. I don't think that would go over so well over here. It's a very deep sugya. Sveikis and emunah come as you know. Everybody knows. That's why it really doesn't need explanation. Sveikis come from the external, shallow, superficial, materialistic part of who we are. It comes from running away from the Creator. Chazal tell us that after Cain killed Hevel, he lost his belief in God. Did you ever have anything so silly in your life? How could Cain lose his belief in God? He spoke to him. Maybe you and I could say, I don't know. Cain didn't believe in God. So Rav Dessler explains in Mechtav Miliyo that when he looked at himself in the mirror after he killed his brother, which was a bad thing to do, even back then, it was a bad thing to do. I mean, he killed a significant percentage of mankind. And he knew that was something, that was terrible in God's eyes. So at that moment, when he looked at himself in the mirror, he had to decide. Either I'm the lowest, worst person in the world, or the God who decided that this is something which is evil goes away. I have a daughter, Shani. She's already Baruch Hashem. She has her own child. And I remember once I told Shani had this thing for maybe you also have with this children. Shani had a thing for sweets, for nash. She was nashing a lot. And she already had her fill already a few times. And I told her, that's it, no more. And I said, don't you try to get any more candy from the cabinet. No, Daddy. So, of course, I walk out. I was out of the kitchen for maybe 5 minutes, and she thought already, the Rosh already is avek, he's gone. So it's time for me. So she got a chair. She got a stool or something, a chair, and she got something to the counter. There's a whole chadgadia. She actually got all the way up to this thing. And when I walked into the room, she had a hand. She almost made it. She just had a hand like by the nash. And I walked into the room. I didn't want to scare her. I saw, she's like a chicken before kaparas. She's standing up there. And I look at her, and she turns around, and she instinctively, she just put her hand over her eyes. In other words, if I don't see this guy, it means he's not here. I just have to make this go away. Sveikis and Emunah. It's not even worth discussing for now. It's a big subject, but it's not for now. Adam HaRishon was hiding at Gan Eden, and we're also hiding. And as a result of our desperate effort to get away from the eyes of the one who sees everything, we close our eyes also. So we're learning now, and we're going to start winding things down a little bit. We're learning now that the avodah, so what's the avodah of a Jew? If this emunah is what the Tanya is describing, and again, I could bring you thousands of more makaris, if this is what the Maral and the Tanya and all the tzaddikim are describing, that emunah is a fact, it's a fixture in the Jewish soul. It's something that transcends human intellect and knowledge. It comes from chochmah shebenefesh. That means that our avodah, what do we have to do? Emunah is a mitzvah from the Torah. It's the first mitzvah in the Sefer Mitzvahs. According to what we're learning, the mitzvah of emunah, the avodah of emunah, is not to acquire faith. That's a terrible mistake. Kilu, it's something that's not there. Kilu, it's something that's outside. Kilu, it's something that's in a book or in a museum or an encyclopedia. It's not to acquire faith. And the mitzvah of emunah is not even to be mechazik one's emunah. The Sfarim HaKadoshim tell us that the mitzvah of emunah is this. Higolena. You know that after the war, the Satan Rebbe Schus Yegelena was in his base medrash in Williamsburg. And I have cousins who were there. And the Satan Rebbe was in the base medrash that was filled with Shavas HaPleita, Jews who were survivors. And the Satan Rebbe got up all of a sudden, he started to scream out. And in Yiddish, but the way he said it was, the way I heard it from my cousins was, Rebbeinu Shalom, we all know that you're here. We're all in such pain. Higala na, Rebbeinu Shalom, show yourself to us. Higala na, reveal, make it clear to us that you're here with us, that you haven't left us, that we should feel it, that it should fill our hearts. Not like we learned last night in one of the Chaburas, where the Gemara says that Ganva apumachtate rachmanakai, that a Jewish thief, when he's creeping around in the basement to go steal something, he says, Rebbeinu Shalom, please, please, help me that I shouldn't get caught. And he believes, but the emunah is something which it hasn't saturated his existence. It hasn't changed his day-to-day life. He's not thinking about it. He would be Meiser Nefesh. That Ganav would give up his life in a second for God. And you and I would also do it in a second for God. And that's why the Ramchal writes at the beginning of Mesilas Yesharim, look inside. I wish another 5 minutes, I'm sorry. But I know that you're all familiar with this at the beginning of Mesilas Yesharim. So we'll do it very quickly. The last piece. When you look at this carefully, you will see. That true shleimus, true perfection, is dveikus b'Hashem, is attachment to God, cleaving to God. Not to leave that emunah as something which is dormant, something that's waiting for what? For an opportunity to die al Kiddush Hashem. What David HaMelech said, V'ani kirves elokim li tov. David HaMelech said, you know what's the biggest tov of my life? Being close to God. V'ani kirves elokim li tov. The greatest tov of my life is closeness to God. Now, if you find a person who's obsessed with money, who's meshiga with money, every minute he's looking in this magazine, making this deal, talking on the phone, he's got all different machines and he's all hooked up, this guy. If he goes out in the rain, his mamish's life is in danger. He's got so much stuff going on. And this guy's meshiga with money. Meshiga with money. It means that his whole chiyus, he breathes the stock market. He lives the stock market. He says, you know why? And he asks him, why do you? He says, because ani mammon, money for me is toiv. That's the ultimate good of my life. That has the ultimate meaning of my life. Therefore, I'm prepared to breathe, to eat, to think, to have. Somebody told me they were in Las Vegas. I remember this like 40 years ago, and he went to the Beis HaKisei. And in the Beis HaKisei, there was a slot machine. It's an unbelievable thing that there's a slot machine. How do I know this? Because the guy told me that was the only thing that he gambled. His wife was gambling, and he taka won in the bathroom. The whole thing came out from the slot machine. Everything came out over there. Like $300 back in the 1960s. When a person says that this is what I believe in, this is what's important to me, the question of your life is, Ma tov shelcha. David HaMelech says, my tov is Hashem. Now, some of you feel that your tov are your children, your grandchildren. Well, Hashem, that's good. Your children, your grandchildren, families. That's your tov. And you know that for the tov that you believe in, for that tov of your life, you do anything for that tov of your life. So why does a rabbi have to stand in front of a shul every single Shabbos crying and begging people to stop talking? Why is it that people come when davening starts at 8:30 or 8:45? Why do they come 9 o'clock? Why is it that to say a word of tefillah is more painful than anything else? Because you have to face the bitter reality that that's not the tov of your life. That's the truth. David HaMelech said, V'ani kirves elokim li tov. And if you don't feel that the tov, because if it was the tov of your life, if you felt that Hashem was the tov of your life, you would do anything for that tov. You're learning, you're davening, your mitzvahs, and a veil would be nothing. A Jew has to have 45 filters on his computer. And he's got to have 10 buddies. Because b'shas ma'aseh, it's 2 o'clock in the morning and there's something that comes and you can press a button and he could have a whole Gil Harayis over there on the computer. And what happened? His buddy's sleeping and the filter arbeit nicht. The filter is broken. Oh, b'shas ma'aseh, where's the Rebbeinu Shloim? V'ani kirves elokim li tov. Where's God? What happened to the horse? Orthodoxy. Observance without the Rebbeinu Shloim doesn't last. It doesn't save you. It doesn't give you the inspiration to be on fire with Yiddishkeit. And you can be the biggest Baal Seichel. So Ramchal says, V'ani kirves elokim li tov. And David HaMelech says, Acha shu'alti meis Hashem. There's one thing I want. There's only one ultimate tov that transcends every other thing that you and I say is tov. And that ultimate tov is what? And anything else that human beings describe as being the transcendent ultimate tov, the Ramchal says it's hevel v'shav, is a lie, it's sheker, it's narishkeit. You'll forgive me, even when it comes down to it. Our families, what we have in this world, at the end of the day, Hav v'shevel nit, that's what the Ramchal says. And he goes on, as I said before, but if you're being drawn by the shallow, superficial side of life, and the taivas, the desires of the flesh are getting to you, meaning you're in that, we're all on that terrible battlefield in this war. Because everything in life is in these signs a test, and so on and so forth. Anyway, I skipped a little bit over here. And at the end he says, the ultimate goal of our lives is closeness to God. And to shatter, to break through all of the mechitzas, all of those barriers that are separating us from God. Rabbis say that's the tachlis of life. You could color that any way you like. I think the title here was Living a Life of Emunah, something like that. A life of Emunah. A life of Emunah is a different life altogether. But there are mechitzas, there are barriers, there are things that are in the way. The Emunah is there. The Baal Shem HaKadosh said, right before he died, the Baal Shem said, Noch meine alle hasogis. After all that I learned and all the Baal Shem Tov knew so much, Noch meine alle hasogis, ich bin a nar and gloib, I believe like a nar, like a child. What the Baal Shem was saying is, not that he wasn't sophisticated. You think the Baal Shem Tov didn't know the Rambam? You think the Baal Shem Tov didn't know the Kuzari? The Baal Shem Tov knew everything. But when it came down to it, the Baal Shem Tov was once together with a Jewish philosopher, and the Jewish philosopher asked the Baal Shem Tov, where do you take your emunah from? Why do you believe? And the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh said, the Baal Shem Tov said, tell me, where do you believe from? So this Jewish philosopher starts to rattle off the Rambam and Reb Saadia Gaon, the Chovos HaLevavos. He says all the Svarim, all the different proofs of emunah and so on. And he said to the Baal Shem Tov, it's a 45-minute lecture. And what about you? He said, my emunah is like the feeling that I had when my mother was holding me in her arms, that she would never let go of me. That emunah doesn't come from a blackboard or a book. So Rabbi say, Rabbi Akiva, we're getting ready for Lag B'Omer. And please be marchel me for the time. Rabbi Akiva, Ashreichem Yisrael, how fortunate we are to be Jews. Lifnei mi'atem etarem umi metar eschem. But for whom we purify ourselves, and who purifies us? Avichem shebeshamayim, v'oyim mikveh Yisrael Hashem. Ma mikveh, Hashem is the mikveh. Ma mikveh metaris atmeim, just as the mikveh purifies those who are tamei. Afakadosh Baruch metaris Yisrael. You know where this comes from? This Rabbi Akiva Ashreichem Yisrael, which is of course the end of Yuma the Mishnah. It's a pasuk in Yirmiyah. Mikveh Yisrael, Hashem is called the mikveh of the Jewish people. Moshio be'es tzara, Hashem who saves us at a time of tzara. Now you know the name Yirmiyah means bitterness. It means bitterness. And it says, and we know that Yirmiyah was a person, Ani HaGever, who saw the Churban, who saw all the devastation, who saw the destruction of Am Yisrael. He lived through terrible tzaras. He was the one that said, Mikveh Yisrael, Moshio be'es tzara. Eis tzara, it says in Strom's the Gematria, Avichem shebeshamayim. In other words, when a Jew goes through an eis tzara, and I'm saying this, I'm embarrassed because I'm saying this in front of people who have been through such tzaras. But when a person goes through a tzara, what is metaher the person when his life has become darkened, blackened, and defiled by death, by misery, by suffering, by pain, by missing somebody that you love, and you can't forget every minute of your life? So what is the Yeshua for a Jew? Be'ez tzara. Moshiach be'ez tzara. When you feel there's no hope. When you feel that you can't start again. The word mikveh means likavos, to have hope. There's only one way that a Jew can begin again. Moshiach be'ez tzara. Eis tzara is the gematria avichim shebeshamayim. Rabbi Akiva. Ashreichem Yisrael, lifnei mi'atim etarmi mitayir eschem, avichem shebeshamayim, mikvi Yisrael Hashem. The only thing that could bring a Jew out is not the idea of faith, it's not the philosophy of faith, it's not the proof of God's existence, it's not the codes, it's not calculus, it's avichem shebeshamayim. And Rabbi Akiva was telling us that when we're going through sorrows, which Rabbi Akiva himself lived through such sorrows, and ultimately he was killed al Kiddush Hashem, the only way to survive is to be toivel in that reality that's inside of us that's called Avichem Shebeshamayim. You know, Rabbi Akiva buried 24,000 students. It's so amazing, it's so crazy, we can't think of the number. He went to 24,000 levayas, 24,000 kelmoles or hashkava, whatever he said back then. 24,000 in those few weeks, 24,000 levayas. And the Gemara says over there in Yevamos, V'ha'olam hayashamein. The world was desolate. There are Jews in this room who have gone through times in life where you felt desolate. And your world was empty. V'ha'olam hayashamein. But there's a mikveh that's called Avichem Shebeshamayim. But Avichem Shebeshamayim means your father. It means someone who loves you. It means a reality. It means something you could smell, you could touch, you could feel. Someone you could talk to, not just mumble a few words in a siddur when you have to. Avichem Shebeshamayim. And Rabbi Akiva got up and he started again. And he had 5 Talmidim that day, which according to the Chidah, that was Lag BaOmer, when he gave smicha to the 5 Talmidim. The Chad Mehem, and one of them was Ir v'kadosh mishmaya kanachis, the holy Tana Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. The B'tzina Kadisha, the holy light. The holy light who taught us in the Zohar Kodesh what we learned today. That the root and the source of Jewish faith is that mikveh that you and I must toivel in is Avichem Shebeshamayim. So I'll tell you a story that many of you have already heard from me, and please be mindful. Another daughter of mine told this to me. And it doesn't sound like it's anything that ever happened. I wrote this also in an article a couple of years ago. It was printed in this thing called Cloud Perspectives. And Siri told this to me. It must be already 28 years ago, something like that. She told me this story. That whatever, 100 years ago in England, there was a poetry recital. You know, the English like to consider themselves to be very cultured, you know. They always sound so smart, even though it's lavdavka. And they had this competition. You know, like we play tackle football, they have poetry competition. So there was such a thing, and there was a big oilum that came to this. And it was down to the 3 finalists. Yeah, they said already 10 poems, and they had 3 finalists. And there's a whole bunch of judges over there. And it came down to the last poem. And the judges assigned the poem the 23rd Psalm, which we know is Mizmor LaDavid Hashem Lo Yechsa. Hashem is my shepherd, and because Hashem is my shepherd, I shall not want, and so on. Gam ki elach begetz almovis. We grew up with it. It's in our mother's milk. That was the final poem. So each one recites it. There was the youngest guy there, said it mamish beautifully. Beautifully. The Lord is my shepherd. You know how they say it. He said very beautifully. And it was unanimous. People started to cheer. This guy's the winner. Hands down, this guy's the winner. All of a sudden, from the back of this auditorium, an old Eastern European Jew gets up, the whole lavush, and he says in broken English, judges, could you let me try? Could you let me try? And they thought, okay, they didn't want to be disrespectful, and it would be an amusing way to end the evening on the cheshbon of this Jew. So they said, okay, sir, come, Rabbi, come up. So the old man goes over there, and he starts to say in broken English, Hashem, God is, he starts to say it. In the beginning, people were smiling, and then by the end, there were people that had tears, and everybody was silent. And he walked out. And then everything was over, and they're walking outside. They gave the award, the prize to the young guy. And they're walking outside, and the young fellow went over to the old man, and he says, you know, Rabbi, really, you deserve the prize. He says, I wasn't competing. And it's not, you said it very nice. It's not mine. So the young man said, but one thing I don't understand, Rabbi. Why is it that when I said the 23rd Psalm, everybody was clapping and cheering, and when you said it, there was crying and there was silence? Why is that? So the old man put his arm around this fellow and he said, there's a very big difference between me and you. What's that? He said, I know the shepherd. I know the shepherd. The shepherd is my best friend. He's my father. He's my brother. He's my child. I don't live a moment without that shepherd. However, this is the Yiddishkeit that the Baruch Shalom wants us to have. This is what it means to be a Jew. Not to recite Yiddishkeit. You know how many years we're already reciting Yiddishkeit? You ever find yourself in a line by Hoshana Rabbah, and there was a guy once in front of me in the shtibel that he was taking his lulav and tickling the guy's ear in front of him. You ever have such a thing, or maybe it was just me, I don't know. I was tickling the guy, and the guy turns around, he gives him in the stomach, the guy. These are Orthodox Jews. Immature Orthodox Jews. But Orthodox Jews. But are we so much better? Isn't our Yiddishkeit the way that fellow was reciting Yiddishkeit? Hashem Yisrael should help us. That we should be able to feel that. And we should be able to, Higala and Rabban Shalom, it's been so many years, reveal within us that faith that you planted in us. Help us to feel that. Help us to live with that. That every moment of our life should be filled with that real recognition and feeling. Hashem Yisrael should continue to pour in the Chama and more in the Chama on the Mishpacha and all of us, that we should be zeichet to come to that day. It's going to be very, very soon, Mr. Hashem, of Yakitzu, of Yirananu Sheichne Afer, that all those who are asleep in the dust will rise up and will be able to see Chaim Yisachar B'Chaim Chiyuso with all of our people, with the Gula Hashem V'Amitis, and Amen, Amen, Amen.